Today we are going to build a Biscornu. So this is my Bee-scornu chart. I've already got my top and bottom already stitched and cut out. I've got the back stitch border around the design, and I've put a little bit of interfacing already on the back of these ones. So first step, we're going to go and we're going to do a little finger press around that perimeter back stitch. So just making sure that we've got our fabric folded down. That way our seam allowance is going to tuck nicely inside the Biscornu as we're stitching it, and it's just going to make it easier for us to see those back stitches. The back stitch around the design is done one stitch at a time, so every whether this is on Aida, so every square of Aida is stitched over each single one. If you're working on an even weave or a linen, you're going to do that back stitch over 2 threads at a time, so as if it were one stitch. And we want to do the whole border like that. We're going to end up using the back stitch as our stitches to guide through to sew the 2 top and bottom together. So first we just want to make sure that the edges are nice and pressed. Working with an Aida is really nice for this because it is a little bit firmer, so it holds that. So see, you can see now the nice sharp edges and what our allowance is going to be for the inside. And we're going to do it to the second one here. So my stitch is done on a 14 count Sage Summer Khaki Aida. This is my first time that I've ever made a Biscornu, and I would definitely suggest doing an Aida. I find it's nice and stiff, like for your first one, an Aida might be a good choice. It is nice and firm and stiff. I felt it very easy to work with as far as lining up your stitches and stuff too. So now we're going to get our thread ready to sew these 2 pieces together. So I am using the 320 DMC, the same color that the back stitch is called for on the chart. You can use whatever you want for that back stitch border on Biscornus and for your thread too, if you wanted to change a different color that you used when you sew them together. It's totally personal preference. This chart, I wanted that seam to kind of look more like a vine, so I went with a green, and there are leaves that come off of that, so it kind of gives it more of a vine look. Now I'm just showing you here exactly that the middle, we want to find the middle of our design. So with this chart, it was nice and easy to find because there's 2 stitches right in the middle. We want to go right between those 2 stitches. And that goes for the top and the bottom of this design. There are those 2 stitches right in the middle. So you want to take it, I'm right-handed, so if you're left-handed, you're going to probably work in the opposite direction, but you want to take whatever's comfortable for you. Line your corner of your top up with the middle of your bottom, and the bottom corner lines up perfectly with the middle of your top. So I'm just showing you here that that's what I'm kind of trying to do. I'm finding that middle between those 2 stitches. I'm going to anchor my thread to start. So I'm doing a loop method here to start mine. So I just anchored it with the loop method right in the middle of those 2 stitches. So the middle point of our base, and then we're going to pull the thread through, and we're going to start. So the first stitch is going to be through, you're going to want to put your needle right through the first loop of your back stitch, so to the left of my middle of the bottom here. I'm grabbing the first loop of the back stitch under my needle, like slipping my needle under that first loop, and grabbing the first loop of back stitch on the corner of the top. When you put these 2 pieces up next to each other, you'll see just how nicely those back stitches stack on top of each other. So you want to make sure that they're stacked on top of each other, nice and aligned. Again, working with the Aida is really nice for this because you can kind of see with Aida, you see that gridding in the fabric really nice and easy. So it really helps to kind of make sure you're aligning it proper, and that you're not off. It is easy regardless, like if you're, as long as you know where that middle seam is on your bottom, you're going to find it easy to line those back stitches up. So we just want to continue doing a scooping underneath the bottom back stitch first and then catching that top back stitch. Again, always making sure that those stitches are aligned with each other, that there's continue to stay stacked on top of each other. When you get started on this, you can definitely anchor your thread with a knot. I just want to say that because I did do the loop method, but absolutely, if you want to just do a knot, go for it. Whatever works for you. It's personal preference. And that being said, this is, like I say, my first time doing a Biscornu. There's probably better ways to be doing things or different ways to do things. Watch all the tutorials, find other ones out there. Again, first time filming a tutorial too of doing the Biscornu, so I'm a little out of camera every once in a while, but it does get better. At least you're getting a nice look at the stitches. Okay, so, and I think I forgot to mention too, with the thread, I did this design on 14 count, as I said. So I did 2 threads. For this stitching, I'm also doing the 2 threads. I would generally say go with what you did for your stitching. So if you only did 1 thread on a smaller count, then you might only want to do 1 thread for this seam. You could also do 2 if you choose. It would just be thicker. So we're just going to continue along sewing. As far as for the interfacing that I used on my stitches here, I'm going to be filling this with walnut shells, and personally I kind of feel like especially with a larger count, that our fabric weave is a little open still. So I kind of in my head imagine that walnut shells, them being finer grind, would find their way through that fabric a little easier. So I want to just make sure that I'm closing off that pathway for them to find their way through, and also protect the stitches a little bit more. Just because it is like a natural grit fiber in there, I really wanted to make sure that it is protecting the stitches, it's stopping any of that finer grit to find its way through that fabric, and it's also going to give us just a little bit more firmness to it. I mean, again, I'm working with an Aida, so it's already got that firmness, but it's going to give it a little bit more structure. This is a very dimensional structural pin cushion, so it's nice to have that little bit of extra strength in there for it. So we're working our way around here with the stitches, and we're just going to get right to the end, and then the fun part of turning the corner. So here we have come up to the center. Again, see, it falls right between those 2 stitches of the flower is our center mark. So I'm just making sure that my center mark lines up with the corner. All my stitches are still on top of each other, and we're going to want to scoop through that very last loop there and finish that row off. Then we're going to be bending our fabric around that corner so that our next loop on the other side lines up with that first stitch past the middle of our top. It did, for me, it took a little bit to kind of figure out what was the best and most comfortable way to like hold my fabric and the seams and stuff, how to press it together. I tried a couple different ways, like using my finger in there to hold it, the seam kind of flat against. And then I also tried like just sandwiching the two together so the stitches light up. I think near the end we'll kind of see which way ended up working a bit better, but it will probably take a little bit to kind of get comfortable with all of that. So you just want to be bending that bottom and top together around that corner. I found when I got to the corners, it did kind of help if you do the first couple of stitches and not quite pull them tight. It just allows a little bit more flexibility. So lining them up and making sure you're scooping the right thread is going to be key, but not necessarily pulling it tight until you get the first like 3 or 4 stitches in there. And then you can kind of pull that corner a little bit tighter. So I've got the first few in there now, and I can kind of, now it's easier to hold those two sides back together like I was before. And so we're going to try sandwiching them together here and then continuing that stitch line. One thing I'll say too is if you've never done a Biscornu before, try it because it is a lot easier. I think it's easy to look at one and just go, okay, what is happening there? It is just 2 square charts. So you can use any design that is square. Even if it, say, wasn't a square chart, you could make it so that it is. You just want the same amount of stitches wide as high. And then you just do that. Pair them up from the middle seam to the corner, and you can put together a Biscornu. It looks way more intricate than it actually is, in my opinion. It's still a very detailed pin cushion, absolutely, but it is easy. It's just sewing, going under the loops of the back stitch. So if you can do hand sewing, if you can do your stitching, you can do this. And the one thing I always love to say is it is sewing. I left myself, I think, about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on these just so I had that extra comfort of I've never done one before, and I would normally say probably 1/4 inch is all you need, but I wanted to have that security of like, I don't know, it just felt more comfortable to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that's what I did. And with sewing, at any point in time, if we're not liking how this is coming together, if it doesn't feel right, if we think we missed something, whatever the case, we can always cut that thread and pull it out. Is it fun to do that? No, not always, but that's how we learn, right? And it's not a permanent thing. It's just like when we're stitching and we make a mistake, right? We can cut that thread and pull it out. So just keep that in mind. But it is, as long as you've got your stitches lined up, you're going to be able to work through this and just simple under the stitches and pull. And as long as you can do a little knot at the beginning, a little knot at the end, that's all we need. So honestly, a lot less intimidating than it looks, in my opinion. And again, this is the first time I've made one as well. So you can see it's starting to take shape already. It's really cool to see that that's all it is just offsetting the 2 squares like that. Gives you such an intricate design. So again, we're approaching the corner here, and we're just making sure we're still all in line. I think it would be pretty hard to miss a stitch. Again, I'm on 14 count. If you were on a small count, then things get a little bit tighter, right? Your stitches are going to be a lot smaller to work with. This particular design, as it's 52 by 52, I wouldn't really suggest going too much smaller, especially if it's your first Biscornu. I would stick with a 14 or 28 count. If you had like a 60 by 60 or even a 70 by 70, then you could do a smaller count probably. But this one on a smaller count is going to get pretty tiny. And if you haven't done one before and you're not sure how it's going to go, I do think having the larger count would be more beneficial because those stitches are going to be easier to find and easier to keep track of as you're going around. So again, we've just made sure we're lined up from that corner is still sitting right in the middle of our design there. And then we're going to scoop in and go around to the other side. And see, this is the part where I'm saying it's a little bit hard to like squeeze those two corners like pieces together. That's where I found it kind of easier. If you like let it be and let it like lay open a little bit, you can see exactly which back stitch needs to catch the other one. At this point, we've already done 2 rows of stitching too. So we're comfortable with what we're doing here. We're scooping under the one and on the back and catching the top one at the same time. So the needle's laying right underneath those 2 back stitches that line up. And then we pull the thread through, up and over, and then back under, up and over. So on that corner, it kind of makes it easier if you just let it lay open a little bit and get your needle under the 2 lined up back stitches, pull your thread through, don't pull it tight, scoop to the next 2, stick your needle under like that, under the first bottom one, under the top. Yep, see, I have things like this happen too, right? Your thread comes off the needle. I've had knotting issues, so it happens. But like I say, sewing, we can always undo that stitch and get it threaded back up and go. So this is where I'm talking about scoop under your back stitch of the bottom, under the top, and then we're going to pull, but you don't have to pull it quite as tight. If you do that like for the next 3 stitches on that corner and then pull nice and snug, I've already got a few in there, so it'll help to bring that corner seam together, and then it becomes so much easier to hold the seams and go forward. So under the one on the bottom and then under the one on the top, and then pull. Again, working with 8 is nice because I'm not, as I slide my needle under those back stitches, it's not catching the fabric. I feel if you were on a linen or an even weave, especially linen, I find easy to catch the fibers of the fabric. You might find that your needle wants to catch the odd thread of the fabric. So till you get comfortable with it, might be best to start with a Aida. If you're an experienced stitcher or you just love linen, then go for it. I don't think it would be, my next one I do will be on linen, just to try and see the difference. I don't think it will be much different, but if I'm trying to think of things that would come up, I feel like the threads of the fabric might play into that a little bit while you're trying to scoop those fine back stitch threads. So see, we're starting to get a nice shape to our Biscornu. It's starting to form. The one thing I'll say is with this, I did not mark the center of my fabric. So if you're wanting to do like a dimple in the center of your Biscornu at the end, either with a button or a bead, I would recommend marking the center of your fabric. The top is nice and easy because it is covered with a design. It's easy to see where those stitches lie. You can reference the chart and you can see exactly where the center of your design should be. And it's pretty simple to just kind of like look at that center and go, okay, all these stitches are that would be the center mark. But the bottom, because there's not stitches all through the bottom, and that's because this is a dimensional piece that's going to sit on the bottom. There's no point, in my opinion, to be stitching that bottom when it's just going to be sat on the whole time. If you want to put extra on the bottom, by all means, you can definitely put a motif or two down there, whatever might speak to you. Again, here, this is a good little shot to kind of show. See, as I got more comfortable with it, we can see that I started to think about the filming process here a little bit more. As I've told you guys before too, is I'm just right now I'm getting comfortable with doing tutorials and filming and that kind of stuff. So essentially I'm just filming myself in the process of doing things. First time making a Biscornu is I'm still getting comfortable with the filming, but there's only one way to grow and get better. So hopefully later down the line, the tutorials will come together a little bit nicer for you guys. But I think you can see a pretty good view of exactly what's happening here. So, and you can see that I've now become a little bit more comfortable with my technique here, because I'm going, I know it's in fast speed, but I'm also moving a lot smoother, and I'm able to hold it out from my body a bit more. That's the hardest part, is usually like I'm in my face stitching, especially for something like this. So that's hard to remember to keep under the camera, and not when I'm pulling it to myself to see better, that I keep forgetting that I'm pulling it out of the camera for you guys. Anyways, so back to the bottom. Mark the bottom so you have an idea of where your middle is. So use whatever marker you would typically use for sewing, whether it's a heat, water, tailor's chalk, whatever kind of a marking safe, fabric safe marking pen that you like to use. It'll just help for when we go to put that bead and or button, whatever you decide for the center, if you want that center dimple. Because I was on an Ada, I was able to like count and see, like follow the lines of the fabric easily. And I mean, you could just guesstimate if that, it's not going to be the end of the world, but. So we're coming up to the middle again. We've got to be getting close to getting it all sewn up. Is this our last side? So we want to keep going until we get one of our sides still open. Now, if this was a larger Biscornu, you might choose to close half of that side before you start filling. But this is a nice little small one, so we're just going to leave one full side open so that we can fill it. And I am going to fill mine today with crushed walnut shells. So here we go. We've got just that one. So I'm just taking my needle off at this point so it doesn't flail around and get lost. And we've got our one side left open, and those seams are finger pressed in. So perfect. You can see the size of it a little bit better here too. So now we're gonna get our fill and get stuffing it. All right, so now we're gonna get set up for our filling. So I've got a container here. This is just a nice fits paper size container. So it's probably like a 9 by 12. It's not too deep, but deep enough to work within, and any overspill is gonna get caught in it. I use the same container with my poly pellets, and it worked wonderful, so I'm doing the same with the ground walnut shells. Now, you can get ground walnut shells at a fabric store. I got mine at the pets shop, and they are lizard litter, and it is significantly cheaper. So this bag was on sale, $17 for this huge bag. And at the fabric shop, a small bag of ground walnut shells about this size, maybe even a little smaller, is about $15. So lizard litter definitely is more affordable. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon, online. I got mine at the local pet shop. I do not have a funnel in my area here, so I'm just making one with some cardstock that I had. It's pretty simple. Just roll the thing, and I'm going to get one little staple in there. You can make it as big of an opening or as small as an opening as you want. I kind of wanted to leave it a little bit big enough to get like a chopstick or something down there as we're filling. Sometimes that helps to just kind of like push it through and like really get it into where you want it. This also gives it a nice little scoop. So essentially like a little ice cream cone. We're just going to scoop and start filling. You could do a little bit of polyfill in there if you wanted, or again, if you wanted to use all poly fiber fill, by all means, whatever feels right or you like. Again, this was my first time using the ground walnut shells. I love it because it gives it some weight. I've also heard it's the best for your needles because poking them in and out of the pin cushion. So it gets into all those little corners, and it just gives it some weight and some real nice structure to it. So we're just making sure we're getting it into all those because this has got quite a few corners and stuff. Now you can use anything that's to poke it in there. So generally a chopstick is used. You get that a lot in your polyfiber fill bags and stuff. I have a chopstick. I don't know where I put it. I often use my paintbrushes as well. You can use different size ones. The small ones are great for like point turning on your pillows and stuff, making sure you get all those points out. And then just getting into all those nooks and crannies while you're doing a fill. So whichever works for you, whatever you like to use for a fill. The one thing I like about the paintbrush for pillows and stuff is it is really nice and rounded. And like I say, you can get the smaller ones really get those corners out good. So if you haven't tried it, I recommend trying it. While we're filling, keep in mind, do you want that center dimple or not? If you want that center dimple, you're going to want to make sure there is some movement to it. It's going to, with the ground walnut shells, it doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't have as much settling as, say, like your fiber fill would, right? So a fiber fill, even when you pack that really, really firm into your item, you're probably going to be able to get a nice dimple regardless of how full, because it's always got that little bit of squishy movement to it. These are pretty solid. If you get enough in there, you could make this solid. So I just made sure I left a little bit of room for movement there just so that I can make that dimple happen in the center. It's also going to make it a little easier for stitching it up. If you're finding that your walnut shells are falling out or you don't like how loose they are while you're trying to sew this up, say if you feel like you have to move your pillow in a different way to kind of really get to those stitches, just put a little bit of polyfiber fill there. It'll kind of help like create that barrier for those shells and lock them in place so that they're not flying out at you all the time. I kind of found that with a little bit of room that I left so I could do my dimple in the center there, that it's not a problem. And this is sandwiching. You can really see it here, how it's sandwiching up really nice. Those stitches are lining up perfectly with each other, and we're just finishing off this last little seam here. So again, we're just scooping under that bottom backstitch thread and then scooping the top one that's right in line with it, making sure that we're pulling it nice and tight. And I'm just double checking to make sure that I've got the right amount of stuffing, because at this point I could still dump some out or add some. I kind of feel like leaving a little bit of movement here for that dimple has allowed me to be able to like kind of pinch this seam just perfectly together for the last step. And I've had mine for quite a while now, so it, and like I say, those walnut shells, I feel like they're kind of one of the better fills because it really, they get into all the small little nooks and crannies, and they're dense. There's not much air and movement between the fibers, so to say, of the particles and stuff. So it's going to compact nice in there, and over time you're not, unless it's coming out of the actual pillow, you're not going to have that same decrease in density. So as I've got about half of my stitches in there, I'm just pushing on it to see what kind of a dimple I'm going to be able to get out of it with the filling I have, and make sure that I'm happy with that. You can do your dimple as like large or small as you want, in the sense of like how much movement you want to that center, if you really want it to come in or if you just want it to come in slightly. So that's a personal preference. Fill it to your liking. Now, as we're approaching the end here, we're going to continue under each of those back stitches. They're all going to line up perfectly. When you get to your last one, you're going to scoop through the very last one. I think I went and I personally scooped one more time through where I originally first started. And then what we're going to do is we're going to knot it off. So just in a standard knot that you would for any kind of sewing. So here we're coming up to the very last. If you ran out of thread at all through this process too, same thing goes. Just tie it off and then tie a new thread and just start like you did in the very beginning. So you can do that if you do run out of, if you didn't grab enough to go around the whole perimeter of this, then that's how you would do that. Okay, so we're just at the very end. We're going to do our last little loop through. Oh, I'm going to rethink that. So this is me debating, I think, should I go through that front one? And then I did, and I'm going to go through and do tie it off, I think. So I'm going right back through that loop there. And we're going to pull that nice and tight. And then I did an extra knot, I think, as well. So I did an extra knot in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stick our needle in through the Biscornu right near where we did that knot. And then you're going to stick it through the other side. Don't let go of that end until you see the tip come out, because you don't want to lose your needle inside. You could switch to a longer needle at this point, but you definitely don't want to lose your needle inside. So then you just pull that thread till your needle or your knot pops into the inside of your Biscornu. So pull it nice and tight, and you'll hear the knot or feel it pop into the inside of the Biscornu. And then we want to just trim off that tail where we pulled it through. So I'm just checking it out to make sure it's in there, and I've trimmed off that thread, and now we are just squishing it and kind of making sure that that thread disappears to the inside of our Biscornu. That way your knot's pulled inside and the thread's just in there totally fine. And now we're just checking it out and making sure it's all nice and filled. We have a beautiful Biscornu. Isn't that the coolest thing? I love these. I think they are amazing. Such a cool, detailed item to have, especially in our stitchy room. Extra decor on our shelves to put your pins in, your decorative pins. They're beautiful and super, super easy to make. Now I'm trying to decide what I want for the center. This is a very detailed top of the Biscornu, so I'm just trying out different buttons and stuff. I really did find that because there's so much stitching, it was hard to use something with too much detail, and a lot of the buttons were, just a little too much for this design. I ended up going with that one. I just felt like it played off of the daisy centers really nice, went with the colors, wasn't too dramatic or took away from the design too much. This is probably my favorite part, though, is to try out all the different options. Sometimes it's really hard to make that decision, but whatever feels best to you. Again, you could use a bead or something too. I just did one button on the top and nothing on the bottom. I think the next time I do it, I'm going to do a button on both sides, top and bottom. And I've seen where you can do like a button on top and a bead on the bottom. So whatever suits you. Again, the center is, I'm just going to show you guys here with the needle that it's easy to find the center based off of those stitches that are on the top. So you can kind of see exactly, you go the middle of that flower and you go all the way down and you're going to come right there. And then it's the same on the other. So again, I'm doing the same on the bottom. I'm kind of finding the middle of those stitches and following my Aida grid down to the center. If you marked this in the beginning, then you don't have to even worry about doing this. And this is just to try and get your stitches to the center of the pincushion. If you eyeballed it, it would be just as good too. Like, you don't have to go right in the center. Nobody would know. But it is nice to know exactly what you're doing. So when you're doing this part, you want to make sure you've got a needle that is long enough to get through your whole pincushion. You don't want to be losing your needle inside. So make sure you get a nice long needle, long sewing needle to go through. And I'm just very strategically here trying to get as close to that center that I can. Double checking it here to make sure I went through the right hole as I took out that needle that I had in there to start. So then we're going to pull through. Now when I did this, I think I still went with my 2, or maybe I did 4 threads. I think I still did just the 2. I think I thought about doing more, but I ended up doing the 2 because I was just going to do it a couple of times through. So I've gone in once and now I'm going to go in through the second time. And again, making sure I'm coming through in the same central area. I am going to just give it a little bit of a pull at this point to kind of see. And I think I'm thinking through my process. What am I doing? Do I have enough thread for this? That was the thought process there. Like, make sure I've got enough before I go too far. So this is the way I attached my button. There's lots of ways you could do it, whatever makes most sense to you or more comfortable with. I left that one tail at the top. I think because I was trying to really get it in the center of the bottom, I went this route. And now we're going to go that last tail through to the bottom. So I've already got it looped through 1 full time, and this will be the second full time. So 2 loops in, and then we're going to pull the button nice and tight after. So again, we're coming through same kind of central area. I made a cross in the bottom of mine so that the threads weren't going through the same hole each time. I went through a different area, so not all that tension's on the same spot of the fabric. Okay, now this part is I'm really squishing those walnut shells around, really moving and pushing to make that dimple a little bit more prominent. And then we're going to push our button into that center as we're pulling those threads at the back nice and tight. And you can really start to see the dimple start to take effect. So again, we're going to push that in, pull those threads tight. This is what's going to really give you that, hold that dimple. So now we're tying it off. We're going to tie off our 2 threads that we have and make sure it's nice and secure. So I'm going to do another knot in there. Secure it off. And then once we're happy with the dimple and everything, if you didn't get the tension you wanted at this point, cut it and try again, okay? Because like I say, it's not permanent. You can take it apart and do it all over again. So I think I've got it in there at a good tension, and I'm doing one last knot maybe as extra security. I'm not gonna lie, you guys, I always go overkill with my knots and stuff. Like, I'm a more is better kind of person. So we're going to do the same technique we did with the end of the seam, where we want to hide that knot within the center of the Biscornu. We want to pull it in just so that it's tucked out of sight. So we're going to thread the needle here. I've got the 2 ends, so I'm just going to cut the one end off right at the knot where we made that knot. So cut that end off, and then we're going to go and we're going to put our needle, make sure you got your long needle again, and we're going to go right through the bottom, the same hole that that thread was in, so that it can pull that knot into. So you want to go through the same path at this point, and then you just want to give it a nice big tug so that it pops that knot into the center, and then you've got a nice clean bottom. So once it's in there, you can see how it pulls it in. I think I just had to adjust it a little because I pulled maybe a little too tight. So just gently pull that. It'll go through. You'll hear it. You'll feel it. Once it's through, then you can cut the other thread off, pull it tight, cut it right at the base. And again, it's just going to pop right inside the Biscornu. You're not going to see that. You can push it in if you need to. Just move it around and it'll disappear in the center there. And there we go. We have our beautiful, beautiful Biscornu, Bee-scornu. That's what this chart is called. It's Bee-scornu. But there we go. We've got our very first Biscornu that I've ever made. And you guys, this is just the beginning. I am obsessed with them. I just, again, think it's the coolest little decoration piece to add to our sewing craft rooms, display in your home. They are cool and unique. I can only, my brain is going wild with the things you could do with this kind of a chart. So I cannot wait to make more. Such a fun, I love it. It's really cool to see something so simple, 2 square charts come together to make something so unique. So at this point, I'm going to see, I've got a few decorative pins. We're going to see what works. So these ones I got, they're from Just Another Button company, the little bee, and there's a hive. There's a honey jar too, but I didn't really like the honey jar in this display. It just felt like too much to have 3. So I went with the 2, and then I just put a simple white beaded pin in as well to kind of go with it. But absolutely fun. You could add some buttons or different decorative pins to it. Like buttons on pins. I do that a lot, glue buttons onto pins, just to use for in pin cushions and displays, pillows and stuff like that. Tons of different shops on Etsy have really, really cool decorative pins. So, and I know a lot of people like to give decorative pins at retreats and stuff like that. So this would be a really fun way to display those special items that people give us. But there we go. There is our super cute Biscornu. Give you guys a little last minute look here of it, just to show all the details. So we've got that beautiful vine floral around the edges there, and then we've got that decorative stitch on the bottom that kind of mimics your beehive. Just love it. I mean honeycomb, sorry, not beehive. Honeycomb. It's to mimic the honeycomb on the bottom there. And then, like I was saying before, that green stitch around the edges there with the little leafing detail off of it, it just gives it kind of that vine look. And then I've got some florals lined up along there. So cool. I absolutely love it. You've got another little vine on the bottom there, and then your big, beautiful daisies, and of course, our buzzing bees. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and you got something out of it. I really enjoy any kind of project like this, so be on the lookout for a lot more Biscornus coming your way. Until next time, guys, take care, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for watching today. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Erin Elizabeth Designs. And if you enjoyed building this Biscornu with me, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Remember, you can turn on the little bell to be notified for my next video as well.